We have one more agent of evolution to talk about, and that is genetic drift. So when you think of genetic drift, think of chance, right? Think of luck or lack of luck, right? So genetic drift is just chance events or being lucky or being in the wrong place at the wrong time. So genetic drift is, as I said, kind of a mechanism of evolution in which allele frequencies in a population are going to change randomly over time simply due to chance events. So it's not natural selection, it's not who's better adapted to that particular environment. This is just chance affecting the population. And it tends to have a much stronger effect in smaller populations. So this is where kind of random fluctuations could potentially lead to the loss of alleles or the rapid spread of alleles if it's a very small population. Larger populations are much more buffered from these random chance events. So let's say, for example, an example of genetic drift would be you're walking through a field of flowers, and most of these flowers are white in color. And as you're walking along, you're not really paying attention. You're just kind of admiring the scenery, and you happen to step on one of the only blue flowers in that field of white flowers. And because you crushed that plant, that blue flowered one, it's not going to be able to reproduce and make more seeds to spread that blue allele through the population. Now, you were not out there stomping on every blue flower in the field because you hate the color blue. This was just a random chance event of you walking along, and because you happened to step or put your foot there, you happen to crush that blue flower. So it's pure chance, and once again has nothing to do with which allele is better adapted for survival. But those chance events can cause frequencies or gene frequencies to drift randomly from one generation to the next. So, as I said, genetic drift can be very powerful in small populations. And populations can become reduced if they go through what's called the bottleneck effect. So the bottleneck effect is simply a reduction in a population that's usually caused by some type of natural disaster, like a flood or an earthquake or such. So the individuals are killed off randomly, and the population is reduced to a small size so that it's really no longer genetically representative of the original population. So here, your book has this image of these little crayfish. So we've got blue ones, we've got orange ones, and I guess you can call that green. It doesn't look green there, but in the bottle it's green. So they're showing two different bottles. We really want to pay attention to the bottle on the right. This is kind of what you would typically see with your soda bottles, right? Where the neck of the bottle has become narrow. And if we consider all the crayfish in our bottle as our original population, we've got a pretty even distribution of green ones and blue ones and orange ones in our bottle. But if we shake out some of these crayfish into our aquarium, and we just shake out a few of them, this is what we get. We find we got a lot more blue than orange and green. So when we look at this smaller population that has been created, it's not really genetically representative of our original population. The blue is much more predominant in this population than it was in the original one. And this is what happens during the bottleneck effect. We're basically going from a larger population to a smaller population. And due to that reduction in size, simply due to chance, right? We weren't selecting the blue crayfish because we like blue and putting them in the aquarium. We were just shaking them out. And the blue happened to come out. More blue happened to come out. So this population, once again, this smaller population, has far more blue alleles in it than what we saw in our original population. So we're going to see a dramatic shift in the allele frequencies, and then these individuals within this tank are going to start reproducing, and we'll start to see what happens then. A real-life example of this would be the northern elephant seal populations. They were hunted down to less than 100 individuals. So we can say that their populations went through a bottleneck. And out of the total population of the remaining individuals, the genes for those surviving individuals were the only ones that were left, right? So they were the ones that got to reproduce while all the other members were killed off. So they were hunted down. So the genes of the surviving individuals were examined. And for 24 different genes, only one allele existed. So that means that they were homozygous for those 24 traits. Therefore, their offspring will always be homozygous. So the other alleles for those traits were lost by the random killing, and therefore there's no genetic variation at all for those 24 traits. Okay, so we can say that they went through a bottleneck, and that the smaller population that came out on the other side for the northern elephant seal population, when they were hunted down to less than 100 individuals, those that were remaining were no longer genetically representative of the original population. So what do we see? We see a shift in the allele frequencies. In this case, it was a shift towards just one of the alleles because the other alleles were completely eliminated. All right, so this is our terms here, so something that you can write down about the bottleneck effect. All right, so it says a drop in the size of a population for at least one generation that causes a loss of genetic variation. And a lot of times this can result in severe inbreeding happening, right? Or members, because there's so few members left. So your book gives the example of the Florida panther, in which their numbers have been reduced so severely that it definitely hindered their survival. And you can read about the Florida panther in your textbook. So I want to move on to another form, another way in which a reduction in a population can lead to genetic drift. And this is what's called the founder's effect. So the founder's effect is the colonization of a new area, and it's by a limited number of individuals that are coming from what we're going to call the parent population. All right, so think of your founding fathers, people who are founding or kind of establishing a new population. So these individuals typically travel to some new area where those organisms were no longer, or did not exist, I should say. So they can travel to a new area where they were not existing before. And how far they travel, of course, depends on the organism. It could be a few feet if we're talking about ants, or it could be several hundred miles away. So it's the colonization of a new area where that species did not exist before. And so we're taking a few members from the original population and establishing a new population. So the individuals that are establishing that new population, we want to look at what alleles they brought with them. And what we find sometimes is that, once again, we might have something unique that pops up, right? Because we're dealing with a very small population compared to our original population. So we can see this in organisms that migrate to a new location, such as an island. So if they migrate from the mainland to the island, and once they get on the island, they may not have the same alleles as on the mainland. All right, so kind of like what we're seeing in that one population where they were only homozygous. So it may be that only the individuals homozygous for a specific trait are the ones that colonize the new area. And therefore the other allele may not even be present in that new population that has been just made. Our example in our slide here, and what was in your book, was about Huntington's disease in the Afrikaner population. So during the 17th and 18th centuries, a small group of European settlers who were mainly Dutch, some French, and some Germans, they founded what became known as the Afrikaner population in South Africa. So it was a small number of settlers who came to that area, and they were relatively isolated, and they happened to take with them or carry with them the mutation that causes Huntington's disease. So this is a neurodegenerative disorder, which we talked about before, that is kind of late acting in life. So a lot of times you don't know you have Huntington's disease until after you've had children and already passed it on. So members probably left their homeland and then moved to this area not even knowing that they had Huntington's disease. So because the founding population was small and they remained relatively isolated, the mutation became much more common in the Afrikaner population than in many other populations, or even in the original population. So we saw an increase in the frequency of the Huntington's disease, or the Huntington's allele, in that new population. All right, so this illustrates the founder's effect as a small group, once again carrying certain alleles that by chance establish a new population in which the allele frequencies of the new population become dramatically different from those of the original population. And once again, that's what we're looking for, is that shift or that change in the allele frequencies. All right, so let's see what you remember from what we've talked about. So we've got this first question here: which of the following is the only one that can generate new alleles? So take a moment, see if you can answer this question. So which of the following is the only one that can generate new alleles? That's a mutation, right? So that's our change in our DNA, right? We said that is the ultimate source of variation for evolution to act on, is a mutation. How about this next question? So we have a population of rodents that display a variety of body sizes. The smallest individuals can easily hide from predators. The larger individuals sometimes do not find enough food to support their larger body size and also have fewer hiding spots. So what kind of natural selection do you think will result? So small individuals can hide from predators. Larger ones have a hard time finding food for their larger body and they can't hide. So what do you think is going to happen? So this is a case of directional selection. So it's directed towards the smaller individuals who are able to avoid the predators. And probably also along those lines, because they do not have to support the larger body size, they probably are able to find enough food as well. So the direction is towards having the smaller body size. And last, let's check this one out. It says in a small population of beetles, some of the beetles were brown and others were green. A volcano erupted nearby, and by chance, keyword there, by chance, most of the beetles that survived were green. So what is this an example of? All right, so we have here that it's an example of the bottleneck. We have a natural disaster that has occurred, which is your bottleneck that reduced the size of your population. And we've got chance events of which ones were killed off. All right. So keep reviewing the information and contact